The box was already taped at the bottom when they handed it to me. That was the first thing I noticed, standing at my own workbench on a Tuesday morning in late February, with a security guard I had never seen before, standing a polite 3 feet to my left. The box sat on the steel surface where I'd spent 12 years of my life, and the bottom seam had been sealed with packing tape, the kind we kept in the shipping bay. Someone had walked back here before I arrived, taken a flat carton, folded it, taped it, and set it on my bench so it would be ready. You do not tape the bottom of a box you are about to fill in a hurry. You tape the bottom of a box the night before, when you have already decided. So I knew, before anyone said a single word to me, that this had been planned for days. Janelle Hoyt from Human Resources cleared her throat. She had a tablet in her hands and she was reading off it, which told me she had been given a script and did not trust herself to remember it. Janelle and I had worked in the same building for 9 years. We had stood in the same break room 100 times. She could not look at me. "Morin," she said, "I'm going to read this so I get it right. Halewood Tools is ending your employment effective today. This decision is final. We're going to need your badge and your laptop. Tom here will walk you out once you've gathered your personal items." Tom, apparently, was the guard. He nodded at me as if we were being introduced at a dinner party. I looked at the box. I looked at the bench. There was not much on it that was personal. A coffee mug, a small brass caliper my father had given me when I finished my degree, a photograph of the first production driver coming off the line in 2015, the one I had framed myself, a spare pair of safety glasses. The objects of 12 years fit into a box that a stranger had taped shut the night before, and that more than anything Janelle read off her tablet was the cruelty of it. Not the firing, the choreography, the way they had measured the exact size of my life there and pre-cut the carton to fit. "All right," I said. Janelle blinked. I think she had been braced for something else. People usually give Human Resources something to manage. They cry, or they argue, or they get loud, and then the script kicks in, and Janelle gets to say the next line about how this is not the time. I did not give her any of that. I picked up the caliper, wrapped it in the safety glasses so it would not rattle, and set it in the box. While I packed, I let my eyes go up, the way you do when you are not looking at anyone in particular. And through the long glass wall of the corner office, I saw Roland Decker watching me. Roland owned Halewood Tools. His father had started it as a hand tool shop in 1971, and Roland had inherited it and run it for 30 years. And for most of those 30 years, it had been a small, decent company that made fine, unremarkable products. Then I came along in 2014 with a patent in my pocket, and within a few years, Halewood made one thing that was not unremarkable at all. Roland was 61 now. He stood in his office with his arms folded, watching the engineer who had built that one thing carry her caliper out in a box, and his face had the look of a man watching weather, mildly interested, not involved. Next to him, in the good chair, the leather one that visiting buyers got, sat his nephew, Trevor. Trevor Decker was 29. He had been hired 18 months earlier into a role called, on the organizational chart, Director of Strategic Initiatives, which is the kind of title you invent when you have a person you need to pay and no actual work for them to do yet. Trevor had a business degree from a good school and a way of nodding during technical conversations that made people think he was following along. He had never shipped a product. He had never stood on the line at 3 a.m. when a tolerance drifted and 400 units were about to be scrap. He had, however, spent 18 months being walked through the building by his uncle, and I had watched the path being cleared the way you watch a road crew set out cones. You know what the cones are for. You just keep driving until the lane closes. Trevor was sitting in the good chair, and I understood, with a calm that surprised me, that the good chair was now his idea of where engineering decisions got made. Roland came out of the office. He did not come all the way to my bench. He came about halfway to the end of the aisle, far enough to say a thing and not far enough to have a conversation, and he put his hands in his pockets. "Nothing personal, Marin," he said. "Family's family, you understand." I have thought a great deal since about that sentence, about how much it gave away. He did not say I had underperformed, because I had not, and he was not the kind of liar who bothered with lies he would have to defend. He did not say the company was struggling, because the company was selling more cordless drivers than it had ever sold in its history. He told me the truth, which was that none of it had ever been about the work. It had been about blood, and I did not have the right blood, and Trevor did, and that was the entire calculation. Family's family. You understand? "I understand," I said, and I did. More than he knew. I finished the box. The photograph went on top, face up, the first driver coming off the line, the lights of the plant behind it. I picked the box up, and it was light, lighter than 12 years should weigh, and Tom the guard fell into step beside me, and Janelle walked on my other side, reading the next part off her tablet. At the front desk, we'll need your badge and your laptop, and there's a packet for you to sign, she said. It's your separation agreement. There's a severance offer in there. It's actually fairly generous. We came out into the reception area with its trophy case of old hand tools and the framed magazine cover from the year the flagship driver won an industry award. The award Roland had accepted on a stage in a hotel ballroom while I sat at a round table near the back. The receptionist looked at the box in my arms and looked away. Janelle set the packet on the counter and put a pen on top of it. The pen was one of the cheap ones with the company name on the side. The packet was perhaps 40 pages, bound with a black clip, and on the front it said, "Separation and General Release of Claims." I set the box down. I picked up the packet, and I read it, standing there while Tom waited, and Janelle waited, and the receptionist pretended to type. I did not skim it. I read it the way I read everything, which is the way that had gotten me into the rooms I had been in, and the way that, it turned out, was about to get me out of this one with everything I needed. I read the recitals. I read the consideration. I read the release language, which was broad, the way they always are, a release of any and all claims of any kind whatsoever, known and unknown. And then I got to a clause, near the middle, a clause about intellectual property, in which I would have acknowledged and agreed that all work product, inventions, and intellectual property used by the company were the property of the company or were licensed to the company on terms that survived the termination of my employment. That clause was not true, and if I signed it, I would have made it true. I put the pen down. I did not slide it back across the counter. I simply set it on the counter next to the cheap company pen, and I left the company pen where it was, and I took my own pen out of my bag, because I am the kind of person who carries her own pen, and I clipped the packet shut. "I'm going to take this with me to review," I said. "I'm not going to sign anything today." "It's a fairly standard agreement," Janelle said. "I'm sure it is," I said. "I'm still going to read it on my own time." There is no script for the person who says no quietly. Janelle looked at her tablet as if the next line might be hidden there, and it was not, and so she said the only true thing left. "You have 21 days to consider it. It's in there." "I know," I said. "I read it." I gave her my badge. I gave her my laptop, which had nothing on it that was mine, because the things that were mine had never been on a company laptop. I picked up my box. Tom walked me to the front doors, and at the doors he said, quietly, so Janelle would not hear, "For what it's worth, I'm sorry, this is a lousy way to do it." And I told him it was not his fault, because it was not. And I walked out into the parking lot where my car was waiting in the spot I had parked in for 12 years. I put the box on the passenger seat and buckled the seatbelt around it, the way you would for a passenger, because it was heavy with the wrong things and I did not want it sliding into the floor. Then I sat for a moment with my hands on the wheel. I did not cry. I want to be honest about that, because in the version of this people expect, the woman cries in the car, and then she squares her shoulders. I did not cry. And it was not because I was strong. It was because I was busy. Some part of my mind had already opened the filing cabinet in my own apartment, the gray flat file in the corner of the second bedroom, and was looking at a single sheet of paper inside it and was beginning, very quietly, to smile. I made one call before I started the car. Not to Roland, not to anyone at Halewood. I called my attorney. To understand what was on that sheet of paper, you have to understand who I was before Halewood ever heard my name. I finished my mechanical engineering degree in 2007, at 25, later than most, because I had paid for it myself, working nights at a machine shop while I took classes during the day. I was good with my hands before I was ever good with equations. And the combination turned out to matter. I had grown up around tools. My father was a Finnish carpenter, the kind of man who could feel a 16th of an inch with his thumb, and he gave me a brass caliper when I graduated and told me that the difference between a craftsman and everyone else was that the craftsman measured twice and then measured again. For 2 years after my degree, I worked for other people, and I went home at night and I built things in a garage I rented by the month, a single bay, in a row of storage units with a roll-up door and a space heater and a workbench I had welded myself. What I was chasing in that garage was a problem that anyone who has used a power drill knows in their hands, even if they cannot name it. The chuck, the part that grips the bit. On most drills, you have to stop, hold the chuck, and crank it to tighten or loosen. And if you do not get it tight enough, the bit slips under load. And if it slips under load, it can ruin the work or hurt you. I had watched my father fight a slipping bit on a ladder once and nearly come off the ladder. And the problem had lodged in me the way problems do. What I built over those 2 years was a self-seating locking mechanism, a chuck that tightened itself progressively under torque so that the harder it worked, the tighter it gripped, and that released cleanly when you wanted it to and never on its own. It was quieter than anything on the market because of the way the internal cam took up slack. It was safer because it could not back off under load. It was, and I say this as plainly as I can, because it is simply true, a genuinely good piece of engineering, the kind you get maybe once if you are lucky and you work for it. In 2012, at 30, I filed for a patent on the mechanism. I did it carefully. I hired a patent attorney with money I did not really have, and I made sure the application was clean and the claims were broad enough to matter and narrow enough to hold. The patent was granted in my name, Maren Kessler, not a company, not a partnership. Me. It was the single most valuable thing I owned, and for 2 years it sat in a drawer while I tried to figure out what to do with it. Because a patent is only worth something if it gets built, and I did not have a factory. Halewood had a factory. In 2014, I came to Roland Decker with my patent and a prototype and a proposal. He was smart enough then to see what it was. He held the prototype, ran a bit up to full torque, felt the lock seat itself, and his face did the thing faces do when an engineer who has been making fine, unremarkable products for 30 years suddenly holds something remarkable. He wanted it. He wanted it badly. And here's the part that, 12 years later, on a Tuesday in February, was about to matter more than anything else in my life. Roland wanted to buy the patent outright. He wanted me to assign it to Halewood, to sign it over, to make it the company's property in exchange for a salary and a title. And I said no. I was 32, and I had no factory and very little money, and a man was offering me a steady job and the chance to see my invention built by the thousand. And I said, no, I will not assign you my patent. I will license it to you. The license will let you manufacture and sell products using the mechanism, and you will pay me a salary as your engineer, and the two things will be tied together, and when our employment relationship ends for any reason, the license ends with it. Not transferable. Not surviving. The right to use my invention lives exactly as long as I do at this company, and not 1 day longer. People asked me over the years why I had insisted on that. Some of them thought it was ego. It was not ego. It was my father's voice telling me to measure twice. It was 2 years in a rented garage. It was the simple knowledge, learned young and learn it hard, that the only thing that is truly yours is the thing with your name on the deed. I had watched men take credit for work that was not theirs my whole life. I was not going to hand the one great thing I had ever made to a man who could fire me on a Tuesday and keep it forever. Roland did not love the terms, but he wanted the mechanism more than he disliked the terms. And his own lawyer at the time told him it was a fair deal for a company that had nothing like it, and so he signed. We both signed. In 2014, Roland Decker signed a licensing agreement that gave Halewood Tools the right to build my invention for exactly as long as I worked there. Then I went to work, and I made him rich. The flagship cordless driver launched in 2015 with my mechanism at its heart, and it did not just sell. It became the product the company was known for. It won the award Roland accepted on the stage. It got written up in the trade magazine framed in the lobby. It was, by the time they walked me out with a box, the best-selling product in the history of Halewood Tools, and the engine of nearly everything good that had happened to the company in a decade. Buyers asked for it by name. Competitors tried and failed to copy the feel of it because the feel of it was in the cam geometry, and the cam geometry was protected. That was what was in the gray flat file in my second bedroom. The patent certificate, with my name on it, and a copy of the license, the one Roland signed, with the clause that no one at Halewood had read in 12 years because no one at Halewood thought they would ever need to. They thought they owned the lock. They had only ever rented it. And on a Tuesday in February, without quite understanding what they were doing, they had stopped paying the rent. It was not the first time, of course. That is the thing about a wound like this. It does not arrive all at once. It arrives in installments, and you tell yourself each installment is the last one, and you keep working because the work is good and you love the work, and loving the work is the loophole through which they take everything else. There was the trade show, 2 years before the end. A big one, the industry's largest, in a convention center the size of an airport. Halewood had a booth, and at the booth we had a cutaway display of the driver, the housing section, so buyers could see the mechanism work, and it was my favorite thing in the world to stand at that cutaway and explain it, because explaining it was the closest I came to letting people see the 2 years in the garage. A group of major buyers came through, the kind whose orders move a quarter, and Roland walked them to the cutaway, and he put his hand on the display and he said, "This is our innovation. We engineered it in-house. Proudest thing this company's ever done. In-house. I was standing 4 feet away in a Halewood polo shirt, and Roland did not introduce me. He did not say, "This is Maren Kessler. She invented this." He said we, and he meant himself, and the buyers nodded at him. And one of them asked a technical question, and Roland turned, not to introduce me, but to summon me, the way you summon someone to refill water, and said, "Maren can walk you through the specifics." I walked them through the specifics. I was good at it, and the order came through, and Roland took me to a nice dinner afterward to thank me, and I told myself the dinner was the apology and the work was the point. That is the loophole. That is how they get you to carry your own erasure for them. You love the work so much that you let them call it theirs, because correcting them feels smaller than the thing you made. There was the budget meeting last year where Trevor sat in for the first time and took notes on a legal pad. Notes I could see were not connected to anything being said. Geometric doodles in the margins. And Roland kept saying, "Trevor's going to be more involved in the product side going forward." And I kept presenting the roadmap. And nobody asked Trevor a question, because there was no question Trevor could have answered. I remember driving home from that meeting and thinking, very clearly, they are building him a path, and the path goes through me. And there was a conversation about that same time that I want to tell you about because it is the one that matters. Roland called me into his office, the corner one with the long glass wall, and he was friendly, the way he was friendly when he wanted something, and he said the company had grown, and the IP situation was, in his word, messy. And it would be cleaner for everyone, for the bank, for the valuation, for the future, if the patent were simply assigned to Halewood and my license folded up. He had papers ready. He always had papers ready. He told me it would not change anything day to day. He told me it was just tidying up. I told him no. I told him no the way I had told him no in 2014. Calmly, without heat, the same answer for the same reason. The patent stays in my name. The license stays as it is. I am happy to keep building for you. I am not going to sign the one thing away. He was annoyed. He let it go. And I drove home that night and I thought, I have just made a decision I may pay for. And I was right. I did pay for it. I paid for it with a Tuesday in February and a box taped at the bottom. But I have also, I thought, kept the one thing they cannot take by firing me. And that was the other half of it, the half they did not see. And it was the half that was about to come due. Measure twice, then measure again. I drove from the Halewood parking lot to the office of Marisol Vega. Marisol was my attorney, and she was not an employment lawyer, although she could have handled that part in her sleep. Marisol was an intellectual property attorney. I had hired her years earlier when I first started worrying about how things were drifting, to read my license and my patent and tell me where I stood, and she had read them and told me, in the dry way she had, that I stood on very solid ground, and that I should make sure I never, under any circumstances, signed an assignment or a release that touched my IP. Keep your own copies, she had said. Keep them somewhere that is not their building. So I had. I called her from the parking lot, and she told me to come straight over. And I did, with the box still buckled into my passenger seat because I had not been home yet. I carried the license and the patent certificate up in my bag. I did not bring the box. The box could wait in the car. The box was the past. The bag was the future. Marisol's office was small and full of paper, the office of a person who does careful work and does not spend money pretending otherwise. She made me a cup of tea I did not drink, and she put on her reading glasses and she read the separation packet first, the one they wanted me to sign, and she got to the intellectual property clause and she made a small sound, a sort of soft hum, the sound a mechanic makes when she finds the exact thing that is wrong with your engine. You didn't sign this, she said. It was not really a question. I didn't sign anything, I said. I read the IP clause and I stopped. Good, she said, because if you had signed this, you would have given them for free the thing they have been trying to buy from you for years. This release would have assigned them the patent and ratified a surviving license. They wrote it into the separation agreement. They were going to get the IP through the back door on your way out while you were upset for the price of a severance check. I sat with that for a moment. The severance had been, in Janelle's words, actually fairly generous. Of course it had. They were not paying me to go away. They were paying me to sign away the patent without reading it. The generosity was the price of my distraction. Then Marisol read the license, the real one, the one Roland had signed in 2014. She read it slowly, and she got to the termination clause, the one I had insisted on, the one that tied the right to use the mechanism to my employment and let it lapse the moment that employment ended, for any reason, with no cure period and no survival, and she read it twice. The first time she read it with her professional face. The second time she looked up at me over the reading glasses and she smiled. "Marn," she said, "do you understand what you have here?" "Tell me what you see," I said. "I want to hear it from you, not from me." "You never assigned it," she said. "They licensed it, and the license ends the day you do. There is no cure period. There is no survival clause. There is no transition window. It says, in plain language that you wrote and they signed, that the license terminates automatically upon the cessation of your employment for any reason." She set the paper down. "They fired you on Tuesday, which means that as of Tuesday, Halewood Tools no longer has any right whatsoever to manufacture, sell, or distribute any product that uses your mechanism." "Their flagship product uses my mechanism," I said. "Their flagship product is your mechanism," she said. "Every cordless driver they have on a shelf in a warehouse or on a truck right now was built under a license. The ones already sold are fine. First sale doctrine. But every single unit they manufacture from Tuesday forward is patent infringement. And not just infringement. Knowing infringement the moment anyone over there reads this clause, which makes it willful, which trebles the damages." I want to describe what I felt sitting in that small office full of paper, hearing a careful person say out loud the thing I had built into a contract 12 years earlier and carried like a secret coal ever since. I did not feel triumphant. That came later, and even then it was thinner than people imagine. What I felt in that moment was something closer to vindication of my younger self, the 32-year-old in the garage who had said no to a man with a checkbook in a factory. She had been right. She had protected me across 12 years and a distance she could not see, and now her work was reaching forward to catch me as I fell. "What do I do?" I asked. Marisol took off her reading glasses, which is a thing she did when she was about to say something she wanted me to hear. "That is the remarkable part," she said. "You don't have to do anything. You don't have to send a letter. You don't have to make a threat. You don't have to call them. The clause is self-executing. The license is already gone. The moment they keep building, they are already infringing, whether they know it or not. The law is already working for you while you sit here drinking the tea. You are not drinking." She almost laughed. "They will not believe that. People in Roland's position never believe that the thing has already happened to them. They think there is still a negotiation. There isn't. The only question is how long it takes their own lawyers to read what you wrote." "And when they call," I said. "When they call," Marisol said, "you let it ring, and then you call me and I answer the phone correctly on your behalf. We do not chase them. We let them arrive." I drove home that night, and I carried the box up to my apartment at last, and I set it on the kitchen table, and I took the photograph of the first driver coming off the line, and I leaned it against the wall where I could see it. And I did not feel like a woman who had been fired. I felt like a woman who had built a door years ago, in the dark, not knowing she would ever need it, and had just discovered it opened. The hardest part was the weekend. I want to be honest about that too, because the temptation in a story like this is to skip from the lawyer's office to the moment of consequence and pretend the days in between were nothing. They were not nothing, they were the squeeze. They were 3 days in which I knew exactly what Monday was going to do, and no one else did. And the loneliness of that knowledge sat on my chest at 3 a.m. The temptation was enormous. The temptation was to call Roland, not to grovel, to explain, to make him understand what he had done, because some childish part of me wanted the satisfaction of his face changing. The temptation was to call Janelle and tell her to read that to her tablet. The temptation, in a lower and more dangerous key, was to take the easy money, because I knew, the way you know the shape of a thing before you can see it, that once they figured it out, there would be an offer, a quiet one, to buy the patent for real this time at a number large enough to make me disappear. And there is a version of me that would have taken it, signed it, banked it, and never thought about the line again. The line. That was the other weight, and it was heavier than the temptation. There were 216 people who worked the floor at Halewood. I knew that number because I knew the floor. I had spent 12 years out there, more hours than any engineer Roland had ever employed, because the cam geometry that made my mechanism work had to be machined to a tolerance that the line had to be taught to hold. And you do not teach a line a tolerance from a corner office. You teach it standing at the machines at the start of a shift, with the operators, with the people whose hands actually make the thing real. 216 people, people I knew by name, people whose kids' names I knew. And when the license lapse landed, when the lawyers stopped the line to stop the bleeding, it was those 216 people who would stand at silent machines wondering what they had done, and the answer would be nothing. They had done nothing. They were going to pay for a choice Roland made in a corner office about a nephew. On Saturday, a text came in from a junior engineer, a kid named, well, I will not say his name. He was a good kid, and he is not part of this. He texted, "Mara and I just heard. This is insane. What happened?" And I looked at it for a long time, and I did not answer. Not because I was angry at him, because there was no version of an answer that did not become a fire. If I told him the truth would travel, and the truth traveling would change the timing, and the timing was the one thing I wanted to leave alone. Marisol had been clear. We let them arrive, we do not chase them, and we do not send scouts. I put the phone face down. On Sunday I drove. I told myself I was just driving, and then I found that I had driven the route to the plant. The route I had driven 5 days a week for 12 years, and the plant was there in the gray Sunday light, dark, the parking lot empty, the loading docks closed. I sat across the road from it with the engine running. I thought about the line inside, the machines I had set up, the cells I had laid out, the fixtures I had designed. I thought about Monday. And somewhere in that hour, sitting in my car across from a dark factory, I figured out what I actually wanted. It was not to burn it down. I could have burned it down. With the patent and Marisol and the willful infringement clause, I could have demanded an injunction, frozen everything, ground the company to powder, and walked away, with a settlement and a salted field behind me. I did not want a salted field. What I wanted, I realized, was for the thing I had built to keep getting built, and for the people who built it to keep building it, and for the man who had decided that blood mattered more than work to discover that the work had a name, and the name was mine, and it was leaving with me. I wanted the truth to land, and I wanted the people on the line to land somewhere soft, and I did not want in any of it to raise my voice. I drove home. I slept badly, but I knew the shape of the thing now, and knowing the shape of a thing is most of the work. On Sunday night, I called Marisol, and I told her what I wanted, and she listened the way good attorneys listen, without interrupting, and when I finished, she said, "All right, then here is what we do, and here is what we do not do." What we did not do was anything aggressive. No demand letter, no press, no call to Roland, no call to anyone at Halewood, no leaked clause, no threat. Aggression speeds them up and gives them something to react to, Marisol said. Right now they have nothing to react to, because they don't know yet. The most powerful position you can be in is the one where the trap has already closed and the other person is still walking toward it. We do not warn them. We wait. So we wait, I said. We wait, she said. Until they find it themselves, they always read it eventually. Some lawyer over there, prepping something routine, is going to pull the license to check a box, and they are going to read the termination clause, and the floor is going to drop out from under them. We let that happen on its own schedule. And when the phone rings, you let it ring, and you call me, and I take it from there. What we did do was quieter and, I think, more important. I asked Marisol to open a careful, confidential back-channel conversation with a company called Brightford. Brightford was a competitor, a larger manufacturer with a good reputation and, notably, no answer to my mechanism. They had been trying for years to build something that felt like the Halewood driver, and they had not managed it because they could not, because the feel was protected. I did not want to license my patent to Brightford to spite Roland. I wanted to license it to Brightford because Brightford could actually build it, and because a properly structured license to a healthy company was the way to make sure the mechanism kept getting made, and because Brightford, if I negotiated it right, could be made to do the one thing I cared about most. I want a clause, I told Marisol. If we license to Brightford, I want it written in that Brightford takes Halewood's line workers as part of the technology transfer, the people who already know how to build it to tolerance, 216 of them. I want their jobs to be part of the deal, not an afterthought. There was a silence on the line, and then Marisol said, in a different voice than her lawyer voice, "That is not a thing most people in your position ask for." They built it with me, I said. I'm not going to land soft on their backs. I drafted, that night, in my own words, on a legal pad at my kitchen table with the photograph of the first driver leaning against the wall, the terms I would accept from anyone who wanted to use my mechanism. Fair royalty, quality standards, because my name was on it even if no one ever saw it. and the people. Always the people. I wrote it out in plain language, and I would hand it to Marisol to turn into the real thing, but I wanted the bones of it to be mine. Then I set my phone face down on the table and I slept, for the first time since Tuesday, all the way through the night. I was not in the building on Monday morning, but I have since learned from more than one person almost exactly how it went, and I'm going to tell it to you the way it was told to me, because the whole point of what I built was that it did not require me to be in the room. It started with Bianca Cole, the chief financial officer. Bianca was preparing for the end of the quarter, and the bank had asked, as banks do, for an updated schedule of the company's material intellectual property, the patents and licenses that underpinned the products, because the flagship driver was such a large share of revenue that the bank wanted the paperwork clean. This was a routine request. Bianca asked the company's outside counsel to pull the relevant license and confirm the terms for the schedule, a box that needed checking. The outside counsel pulled the license. Pulled, I am told, the very document Roland had signed in 2014, the one no one at Halewood had read in 12 years. And somewhere in the reading, a young associate, the kind of careful young associate I had once hired to write my patent, got to the termination clause and went very still. The associate took it to the partner. The partner read it again, the way Marisol had, and then the partner called Bianca Cole, and Bianca Cole, I am told, said the sentence that I think of as the beginning of the reckoning, the sentence a person says when the floor has just dropped and they are reaching for the railing. "Say that again," Bianca said. "The license ended when we fired her?" The partner said it again. The license to use the patented mechanism terminated automatically upon the cessation of Maren Kessler's employment for any reason, with no cure period and no survival. Ms. Kessler's employment had ceased the previous Tuesday. Therefore, as of the previous Tuesday, Halewood Tools had no right to manufacture any product using the mechanism. Every unit built since Tuesday was infringement. Every unit built going forward, now that the company knew, would be willful infringement, exposed to treble damages. And the flagship product, the best-selling product in the history of the company, the engine of the quarter the bank was asking about, was nothing but the mechanism in a housing. I am told, Bianca Cole sat down. The outside counsel was unambiguous about what had to happen next, because outside counsel's first duty in that moment was to stop the company from making its exposure worse with every passing minute. You cannot knowingly keep infringing. The advice was immediate, and it was not optional. Stop the line. Stop building the flagship driver right now, today, this shift, until the IP situation is resolved, because every driver that comes off that line is another count of willful infringement and another multiple of damages. So they stopped the line. Wendell Pike was the operations manager, and Wendell had been on that floor for 30 years, and Wendell was the one who got the call to down tools. He told me about it later, over coffee, and his face when he told me was the face of a man who had been asked to do something that made no sense and had to do it anyway. "They called me from upstairs," he said. "Told me to stop the main line, mid-shift. I asked why. Nobody would say. I said, give me a reason I can tell my people, and they said there isn't one I'm allowed to give you, just stop it. So I stopped it. 216 people, standing at machines that aren't moving, looking at me, and I've got nothing to tell them." He shook his head. "First time in 30 years, I couldn't answer my own floor." That was the part I had grieved across the weekend, and it had come exactly as I feared, and the only thing that kept it bearable was that I already had Marisol on the phone with Brightford and a clause being written that would catch those 216 people. But on Monday morning, they did not know that. On Monday morning, they just stood at silent machines, and Wendell stood in front of them with nothing to say, and the silence on that floor was, I am told, total. And upstairs, in the corner office with the long glass wall, Roland Decker finally understood what he had carried out to my car in a box. I am told Trevor was there, in the good chair, and that Trevor said something about renegotiating, about leverage, about how every deal could be redone, the kind of thing a person says when they have a business degree and have never shipped a product, and that Roland did not even look at him. I am told Roland stood at the glass wall, the same glass wall he had watched me through 6 days earlier, and looked down at the floor he could not see from there, the floor that was silent, and said, to the room, to the lawyers on the speakerphone, to no one, "Get her on the phone. Now." My phone rang at 9 o'clock that Monday morning. I was in my kitchen. The coffee had just finished. The photograph of the first driver was leaning against the wall where I'd left it. My phone was face down on the table, and it buzzed and lit the table underneath it. And I turned it over, and the screen said the main Halewood Tools number, the switchboard, the number I had called from inside that building 10,000 times. I looked at it. I did not feel the thing people think you feel. I did not feel like gloating. I felt, mostly, very quiet, the way the floor must have felt. I thought about the box taped at the bottom. I thought about family's family, you understand. I thought about a garage with a space heater and a roll-up door and a 25-year-old who measured twice. I let it ring. It rang 4 times, 5, and then it stopped. And the screen said 1 missed call, and I set the phone back down, face up this time, and I poured my coffee, and I called Marisol, and I told her they had called, and she said, "Good, don't call back. I'll handle it from here." And I drank my coffee while my mechanism sat silent in 216 pairs of idle hands, and somewhere a man who had told me it was nothing personal began, at last, to understand exactly how personal a contract can be. What followed, over the next several weeks, was the long unraveling, and it went almost exactly the way Marisol had said it would, which is to say it went through every stage a person goes through when the trap has already closed and they cannot yet accept it. First there was charm. Roland called Marisol because I would not take his calls, and Roland was warm and reasonable and wounded, and he spoke about the long years we had worked together, the family we had been, and he proposed that of course this had all been a misunderstanding, that the separation could be revisited, that perhaps I would consider coming back, and surely we could all get the line running again while the adults sorted out the paperwork. Marisol relayed it to me without comment because she knew I would hear what it was. It was a man trying to reopen a door I had already walked through, so that he could close it behind me again on his own schedule. The line that fired me could not rehire me. I told Marisol no. Then there was the offer, the real one, the one I had known was coming since I sat across from a dark factory on Sunday. Halewood, through counsel, offered to buy the patent outright for real this time, at a number that was large, larger than the severance, large enough that Marisol read it to me twice to make sure I had heard it. It was, in its way, a confession. For 12 years, Roland had tried to get the patent for the price of a salary, and then for the price of tidying up, and then for the price of a generous severance. And now, with the line stopped and the quarter bleeding and the bank asking questions, he was finally willing to pay what it was worth, or close to it, to a person he had decided 6 days earlier was worth nothing at all. "It's a generous offer," Marisol said. "I have to tell you that as your lawyer. It is also, between us, an apology with a price tag, addressed to himself. He is not buying the patent. He is buying back the morning he taped that box." "I know," I said. "You don't have to take it," she said. "Brightford is real. The terms are better in every way that matters to you, including the one that matters to you most. But I am obligated to tell you that this is a lot of money and the easy road exists." I thought about it for one night, because I am not a fool and it was a great deal of money, and then I told her no, and I told her why, and the why was the line. Roland's offer was for the patent. It said nothing about the 216 people standing at silent machines, because to Roland, they were not part of the asset. They were overhead. Brightford's deal, the one Marisol was building, took the patent and the people both. I was not going to sell the mechanism to the man who would keep the floor I loved and shed the people on it. I was going to license it to the company that would take the people. There was, near the end of this, a single call with Roland that I did take. I took it on Marisol's advice, on her speakerphone, in her office, with her sitting across from me, because she said there were things he would say to me that he would not say to a lawyer, and that I might want to hear them once, for myself, so that I would never have to wonder. His voice on the speaker was smaller than it was in person. That is the thing I noticed. Men like Roland are large in rooms they own, and smaller on telephones in rooms they do not. "Marin," he said, "I think this has gotten out of hand. I think we both said and did things. I'd like to fix it." "You fired me, Roland," I said. "I didn't say or do anything." There was a pause. Then he tried the only key he had ever really had. "After everything I gave you," he said, "after everything this company gave you, the platform, the career, you'd really do this to us over, what, pride? Family's family, Marin. We were practically family." And I want to tell you what I thought, in that pause before I answered, because it is the truest thing in this whole story. He said, "After everything I gave you," and what I thought was, he had given me a box. I remembered the tape on the bottom. I remembered that a stranger had folded and sealed that carton the night before, had measured the size of 12 years and pre-cut it to fit, and that this box, taped at the bottom, was the sum of everything Roland Decker had ever actually given me. The career I had built myself, in a garage, with my own hands, and brought to him finished. The platform had been mine before he ever saw it. The only thing he had ever given me was the box, and he had even had someone else tape that. "You gave me a box, Roland," I said. "Someone taped the bottom the night before. I'm not signing it back to you. Marisol will be in touch about the rest." And I reached over and I ended the call, and I did not raise my voice, and I did not say a cruel thing, and the room was very quiet, and Marisol looked at me across her desk full of paper and gave me a small nod, the nod one careful person gives another. Roland was left holding a silent factory and a nephew in the good chair, and I went home. I want to tell you that it felt like victory, because that is the shape the story wants, but it would not be true, and I promised you the truth. It felt like grief. There were nights, in those weeks, when I sat in my apartment with the photograph of the first driver leaning against the wall, and what I felt was not triumph, but a kind of low, steady mourning. The mourning of a person who has been proven right about people she desperately wanted to be wrong about. Because here's the thing, no one tells you about the reckoning. The reckoning does not give you back the years. It does not give you back the version of Roland you had decided to believe in, the gruff but fair man who valued the work, the version you had constructed across 12 years out of trade show dinners and the occasional word of praise. Because believing in that version was easier than believing you were building a fortune for someone who would tape your life into a box the night before he ended it. The reckoning takes that version away. It hands you, in exchange, the truth, and the truth is colder. I had wanted them to be better, more than I had wanted to be right. I want to say that plainly because I think it is the center of everything. The patent was not my weapon. The patent was my insurance, taken out by a frightened 32-year-old who had hoped, the whole time, that she would never have to use it. Every year that I did not have to use it, I let myself believe a little more that I would not. Using it, in the end, was not a victory. It was the moment I finally stopped believing the better version. Because they made the choice for me, and once they made it, there was nothing left to protect but myself and the people on the floor. The colleagues who went silent were their own small grief. Most of the people I had worked with for 12 years did not call. Not the engineers, not the managers, not the ones who had eaten lunch at my bench. People are afraid, I understand it. A company is a current, and most people swim with the current because they have rent to pay, and I do not hate them for it. But the silence taught me something about how thin most of it had been. The camaraderie, the team, the family Roland kept invoking. It was real while the work flowed through it. When the work stopped, most of it evaporated, and I learned which parts had been real by which parts were still there when the noise stopped. Wendell Pike was still there. Wendell called me in the middle of all of it and asked if I would have coffee with him. And I said yes, and we sat in a diner near the plant, two people who had stood at machines together for 12 years, and Wendell stirred his coffee for a while before he said what he had come to say. "I want you to know something, honey," he said. "Nobody on that floor blames you. I made sure of it. There were people upstairs trying to put it on you, saying you'd done something, sabotaged something." I stood up in front of the whole floor and I told them the truth as far as I understood it, which is that you didn't do anything except get fired, and that whatever happened after that happened because of the man who signed the box, not the woman who got handed it. They believe me, they know you, they know who stood out there with them at 3 a.m. and who never came down from the corner office. He looked at me. "Whatever happens with all this, I needed you to know the floor is not against you. The floor is with you." I did not cry in the parking lot on the Tuesday I was fired. I will tell you that I came close, in that diner, over a bad cup of coffee, when a 57-year-old operations manager told me the floor was with me, because that was the only thing in any of it I had actually wanted, underneath the patent and the leverage and the careful waiting. I had wanted the work to have meant something, and the people to have been real, and Wendell, stirring his coffee, told me that the part I cared about had been real all along. It just had not been in the corner office. It had never been in the corner office. It had been out on the floor the whole time, where I had been too, and I had simply spent 12 years looking up when I should have been looking around. That was the cost and the comfort of the whole thing arriving. I had to lose the version of them I had invented to finally see the people who had been standing next to me the entire time. The Brightford deal closed in the spring. I sat in a conference room that was not Marisol's cluttered office and not Halewood's lobby with its trophy case, a clean, bright room belonging to no part of my old life. And across the table was Curtis Lowe, who ran acquisitions for Brightford, a calm, careful man who had done his homework and knew exactly what my mechanism was worth and did not pretend otherwise. Marisol sat beside me. The license we signed was the one I had drafted in plain language at my kitchen table, turned by Marisol into the real thing, and it had in it everything I had cared about. It had a fair royalty, so that the mechanism would finally pay me what it had paid Roland for a decade. It had quality standards because my name was on the patent, even if no consumer would ever see it, and I was not going to let it be built badly. And it had the clause, the one most people in my position do not ask for. Brightford agreed, as part of the technology transfer, to extend offers of employment to the Halewood line workers who built the product, the people who already knew how to hold the tolerance, because Brightford was smart enough to know that the cam geometry lived in their hands as much as in my drawings. 216 people. Not all of them came. Some had routes they would not pull up, but the offer was real and most of them took it, and the line that had stood silent in February was building my mechanism again by summer, in a different building, for a different company, with the same hands. Curtis Lowe shook my hand at the end and said the thing that, of everything anyone said in those months, came closest to what Roland had never managed to say in 12 years. "We want the mechanism," he said, "and we'll take the people who know how to build it." Frankly, Ms. Kessler, I don't understand why anyone ever treated either one as disposable. Halewood Tools, without the right to build its flagship product, did not survive in the form Roland had run for 30 years. The company was sold. Roland exited, with money, because men like Roland always exit with money, but he exited from the thing his father had built, which I think was the only currency that ever actually meant anything to him, and he exited because of a clause a 32-year-old woman had insisted on in a contract he had not bothered to reread in 12 years. Trevor never relaunched anything. There was nothing for him to relaunch. The good chair he had been so eager to sit in turned out to be at the head of a table with nothing on it, and I opened my own shop. It is small, it is a single bay, which makes me laugh sometimes because it is not so different from the garage I rented by the month when I was 25, except that I own this one, and my name is on the door, an actual door, with an actual sign, that says Kessler Design. I do consulting and development work for companies that make real things, and I'm careful about whose work I take, and I keep my patents in my own name, and I read every contract twice, and then I read it again. The patent that started all of it hangs framed on the wall over my workbench, next to the photograph of the first driver coming off the line in 2015. The two of them together, the paper and the proof. Wendell stops by sometimes. He took the Brightford offer, runs a line for them now, and he comes by on a Saturday with 2 coffees, and we talk about tolerances and grandchildren. And it is, I think, the only relationship from those 12 years that walked all the way through the fire intact. And it walked through because it had never been about the corner office. It had been about the work and the people, which is the only thing that was ever real. So here is what I would tell you. If you are the one listening to this because something like it is happening to you, or has happened, or you can feel it coming the way you feel weather. If you are the one who builds the thing that everyone else takes credit for, read your own paperwork. I mean that as plainly as it sounds, and I mean it as more than paperwork. Know what you actually own. Know the difference between being valued and being used, because they feel similar for a long time, and then one day they do not feel similar at all. Keep your name on your own work. Keep your own copies, somewhere that is not their building. Be the kind of person who carries her own pen. Not because everyone will betray you, most people will not, but because the cost of being ready is small, and the cost of being unready is everything you made. And understand this, which took me 12 years and a box taped at the bottom to learn. The respect that lasts only as long as you are useful was never respect. It was rent. They were paying it for as long as they needed the building, and the day they decided they did not need you, you found out it had only ever been rent, and you were free to take your name and walk. I did not raise my voice. I did not burn anything down. I let a contract I had signed when I was young and afraid do exactly what it said it would do, and I used what it gave me to make sure the work kept living and the people who did it landed aloft. And I kept, through all of it, the one thing they could never tape into a box, which was my own name on my own work. The day they decide you are nothing is the day they find out what you were worth. Take care of yourself, read the fine print, and keep your name where it belongs.